Hello, I'm Dave Hart. I'm the preacher for the Warren Avenue Church of Christ in Winslow, Arizona, and I'm so glad that you've chosen to join me today. Today we're going to take a look at a sermon entitled, They Are Watching You. They are watching you. Sounds a little creepy, doesn't it? But who's watching you? Who's watching you? Well, as a Christian, the world is watching you. Non-Christians are watching you. But also, as a Christian, other Christians are watching you. Other Christians are watching you. So, as a Christian, we must act like a Christian. A Christian, of course, is to tell others about Christ. That is part of our duty and responsibility as a Christian, is to spread the Word of God, to tell others about Jesus Christ, how to be saved, what is and isn't wrong and sinful, and on and on and on. But we're also to have the right actions. We're also to have the right actions in order to be a representative of Jesus Christ and to bring others to Him. I like the analogy of it's kind of like an airplane. On an airplane you have two wings. If you only have one wing, the plane won't fly. So you need both wings. So our responsibility and duty as a Christian is not only to tell others about Christ, which, by the way, we must do. We have a responsibility to do that. But we also must act like a Christian. We also must act like a Christian. When we don't have both of those, we're not doing what we should do. And let me give you an example. Years ago, I had a friend, and he went to the gym that I worked at. And he was not a Christian. And he was going to go pig hunting or boar hunting with another guy that I knew that also worked out at the gym. And this guy here, he was, was known for being a Christian because he went around and telling everybody about Christ and all that kind of stuff. He was with some denominational group. And like I say, we're supposed to tell others about Christ. But there come a problem when these two went out to go pig hunting together, where the boy that was supposed to be a Christian, he drove him to some property that had a do not trespass sign on it. And the non-Christian didn't want to go hunting there. He didn't want to go hunting there because he wanted to respect what the sign said. Well, the boy that was supposed to be a Christian, he said, "Oh, we'll just pray about it." So they prayed in the car that they would be able to hunt and they wouldn't get caught. And they went out hunting, killed several pigs, and guess what? They got caught. He told me the old farmer came by and they tried to hide from him. And he stopped his truck and got out and he yelled out to him. He said, "You guys can sure kill my pigs, but you sure can't hide very good." And they apologized to him. And the one who was not a Christian, told the farmer that he would come back and work on his property to work off the money for the killing of those wild pigs. And that's exactly what he did. And the Christian guy never did that. So guess what? The boy that wasn't a Christian, it certainly didn't make him want to become a Christian by the actions of this boy that was supposed to be a Christian. First off, praying for something that was wrong in the first place, and then secondly, not trying to make it right after he had done it, after he'd done something wrong and injured somebody in some way. So we see that we must tell others about Christ, but we must also strive to live our life as a consistent Christian. Because there again, the world watches us, other Christians watch us. And you might say it's not fair because non-Christians can do so many things and act almost any way they want, and the world doesn't even care for the most part, doesn't even bat an eyelash at something that if a Christian would do, it would be scandalous and it would be a big deal and all that kind of stuff. But that's part of being a Christian, is that we have to be held to a higher accountability. We have to hold each other to a higher accountability. Those in the world don't have that accountability. They do, really, don't they? Because what they do, they will be judged on at some point. But as Christians, we are held to a higher accountability. We're held to the accountability of the Bible. But it's very sad when a Christian does step out of line and doesn't act like a Christian. And some Christians, even in the Lord's church, have done some very, very bad things. I have known of Christians who have murdered. I've known of Christians who have raped, committed adultery, who have stolen things. Remember a few years ago now, the preacher's wife who shot her husband and killed him, and he was from a very prominent family, well known among the churches of Christ. Many of his relatives were preachers and had leadership positions in the church. And after the deed was done, the wife came out and said a lot of terrible things about him. It's kind of hard to know what is true and what's not true after the fact, and he wouldn't be able to defend himself. But it was a hard time for us in the church. It was a hard time for us when that happened. There was a young person in the church years ago that didn't always act the way that he should. And I remember when a local cop, asked me if this person went to the church that I was the preacher at. And when he asked that, a lot of times when somebody would ask, I go, so-and-so go to your church? I'm like, yeah. Well, when he asked that, I kind of hung my head and kind of wanted to say no, but I couldn't do that. And sure enough, this guy, cop had caught him stealing something. So our actions can bring great shame to Christ and his church. We can give the enemy great advantage by doing wrong. So we got to watch what we do. We can drive people away from the church. We can drive people away from the church because of our actions, our ungodly actions. And we can cause people to not want to come to the Lord in the first place. And I've heard it over the years many times. Well, I don't want to become a Christian and be like those people, because some of those people were doing wrong things. And it's very hard, isn't it, when you're trying to bring somebody to the Lord and they bring up especially something about maybe somebody in your church that you're at, that they are doing something that's improper or ungodly. And of course, as a church, I think we need to do a better job of taking care of those things when they happen. But those things do happen, and sometimes we don't know about it. And it can be a very, very hard thing to overcome that when you're trying to bring somebody to the Lord in this church. Now listen, this is important as we go through this lesson. The best of us will slip up at times. We'll have bad days. We'll have things that just go wrong. Sometimes there'll be several things that go wrong. And there's going to be times that we're not perfectly consistent in our actions. There's going to be times that we just blow it. I'm not making excuses. I'm not saying that's right, because it's not. But I'm saying in our humanness, that will happen. And when that does, we need to repent and get back right again. And we need to strive to make those times in our lives few and very far apart. We should all strive to be the best example of all times of what a Christian should be. As I said, we're going to make mistakes and fail at times, but we need to strive to be as consistent as we possibly can at being the best example that we can possibly be, because they are watching you. If we claim to be a Christian, if we make that claim, then in order to fulfill that claim, we have to live a life like Christ. We have to follow Christ. And there again, we're not going to be perfect. I don't know how many times that I fall short in just every day of my life. But I'm striving to be like Christ. And just what were some of the things that we saw that Christ did? And there are many others, but some of the things that we saw him do was he helped others in the things that he was able to help them in within their life here on earth. In other words, when people were hungry, it was in his power to feed them, and that's what he did. People were sick. When people were sick, demon possessed, he would help them with those things. He helped people with this physical life that deserved to be helped, and the things that he could do. Now, with us, of course, we are limited as humans, and I wish I could feed every hungry person in this world, clothe everybody that needed clothing, and give everybody a home that was homeless. I wish I could do that. But it's not within my power and ability to be able to do that. But I can help some people, can't I? I can do for some people. I always liked that story about the boy that was walking along the shore, and the waves, tide had brought in all these starfish, and the sun was coming out, and these starfish were drying up and they were dying, and he was going along the beach and he was picking up the starfish and throwing them back into the water. And the man came by and said, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "Well, I'm throwing these starfish back into the water so they won't die." And the man looked down the beach and saw the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of starfish that are washed up, and he said, "You know, you're not even going to make a dent. What does it matter? There's so many of them." And he picked up another starfish and looked at it, and he said, "It matters to this one," and threw it back into the water. We may not be able to do everything for everybody, but we can do something for somebody, can't we? And that's what we see Jesus doing. But even more important than that is that he taught them how to be followers of God. He taught them how to be a disciple. He taught them the way to the kingdom, that the kingdom was coming, and that he was the way into it. And he taught and he taught and he taught. You know, he would, like I say, he'd feed somebody if they needed to be fed, because just like with us, if somebody comes to us and they're hungry, they're not going to be a very good Bible student on an empty stomach, are they? Or, you know, if they're without some kind of necessity, it's going to be harder to convert them until we kind of meet that need in their life. And that's what Jesus would do, but then his priority was to teach them the truth of God, to teach them the way to God. And this is what he did consistently all the time that he was here on this earth. And if we're going to follow him, we need to do the same type of things. 1 John 2 verse 6. 1 John 2 verse 6 says, "He who says he abides in him," talking about Jesus, "ought himself also to walk just as he walked." So we are to learn to walk as he walked. And in order to do that, we must learn how he walked. There again, we have to go back to the Bible, study the Gospels, see what Jesus did, see who he really is. I see so many people try to describe the work and life of Jesus, and they don't get a lot of it right. Or they get part of it right, but they don't get all of it right. In other words, a lot of people are going to have a tendency to get the real positive, loving side of Jesus right, but not get the stern side, not get the strong side, not get the side that stood up for the truth, that cleared the temple out. You know what would happen today if Jesus would come and clear the so-called temple out today? Because, you know, we have the church, but if he come and let's say come to the church and clear the church out, what do you think people would say? Well, I guarantee you this people would say, he wasn't being very Jesus-like. So we need to get the whole picture there. And we need to walk as he did, to have that love and compassion and that reaching out and that helpfulness, but also that strength and that standing up for the truth and being passionate for the things of God and standing against the things of the devil. So we need to walk like him. If we're going to walk like him, we need to know him. We know him by reading and studying the Gospels, and of course the rest of the Bible also, and being like him. And that is going to be a lifetime commitment, because there again, we're never going to get that down perfect, but we can certainly grow towards it and be better at it than we are today, can't we? 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1 says, imitate me, this is Paul speaking, just as I also imitate Christ. And you know, when I first read this years ago, it bothered me because I thought Paul was claiming perfection here. Be like me because I'm just like Christ. But that's not what he was saying. That's not what he was saying at all. He was saying be like him as much as he is like Christ. Be like Paul as much as he was being like Christ. See, this is what I was talking about earlier. We need to be Christ-like to be an example to others. We're not going to be Christ. We're not going to be perfect in that example. But we need to be a Christ-like example, just as Paul was saying here. Being a Christ-like example, and others are to imitate that. We need to live a life that others should imitate in order to be Christ-like. You hear what I'm saying? We should live a life like Christ so that others can follow that and also learn to live a life like Christ. So we got our work cut out for us. I dare say we all have a long way to go in that, but we need to realize what's at stake, that people see the example of our lives. I have heard people over and over and over again, maybe they had godly grandparents and they'd bring up some of the things that they would say about God. They would have deep meaning and deep bearing on their lives many, many, many years later. But just as much as people bringing up things that they said, they bring up the actions they did. My grandmother never missed church. My grandfather was an elder in the church for 30 years. My grandfather led singing. These things, the way we act, have deep impact on others. Have deep impact on others, for the better or for the worse. Romans 12 verse 2 says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So we're not to be like the world, we're to be like Jesus. The world tells us many things, and the world comes crashing in on us every day of all of its messages. I dare say most of us watch TV. Well, what message is that sending? If we listen to music, what message is that sending? If we read books, what message is that sending? If we watch the news, if we just look out our window and seeing people live their lives, what message is that sending us? And it crushes down on us and it impacts us. We'd be foolish to say that the world does not have an impact in our lives in various ways. And not everything in culture in the world is wrong or evil, but much of it is. And God says that if we're to be there again Christ-like, then we got to renew our mind. We got to get our mind right. It's ultimately a battle for the mind. You ever see those cartoons where you'd have the devil on one side and you'd have an angel on the other side, and they were both whispering in your ear? Well, it's a lot like that. There's a lot of reality to that. You got the world and the devil and evil and ungodliness and your own weaknesses and sins and that whispering on one side of your ear, and you got the Bible, the Word of God, the church, godly influences whispering in the other side. And which one are you going to let in? Which one are you going to let control your mind? God doesn't control your mind unless you allow him to. You got to understand that. It's us that chooses to either let the devil control our mind, and they're going to dare say that all of us do that at times. Can you think about times when maybe you're just, not having good self-control over your mind. Your mind's just slipping someplace where it certainly shouldn't be going. You're thinking about things you certainly shouldn't be thinking about. And it takes a lot of discipline, a lot of self-control. And there again, getting into the more scriptures that we can, even godly hymns and songs that we can meditate on in our minds to help us keep focused on the right things so that we will have the right actions. The world looks at the true Christians as peculiar people because we don't live like them. We live differently. We see things differently, and we do things differently. Ephesians 4:22 through 24. Ephesians 4:22 through 24. That you put off concerning your former conduct, so we're not going to act like we used to act. The old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. So we need to put off the old conduct. We need to put off the old man. And that's hard. That's really hard for us to do, because when we die in the waters of baptism, the old man dies. But boy, we sure tend to resurrect him, don't we? We tend to resurrect the old man all the time, and we need to kill him again when that happens. So we got to put off the conduct of the old man. The old man just grows more and more corrupt. More and more corrupt. I know for my own self, when I was younger, as I grew older, I was very innocent. As I grew older, I learned more and more evil and ungodly things. And during my late teens and early 20s, I participated in a lot of evil things. And it was growing more and more corrupt until I decided I needed to come back. I needed to make that change. I needed to kill and put off that old man. So we need to renew the spirit in us, in our mind. Put on the new man. Live a righteous and holy life. By there again, following Christ and doing things that he did and being the person that he was. It needs to be a goal. It needs to be something we strive for each and every day of our lives. Remember that saying that was so popular a few years ago, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And that's how we need to be. We need to think about everything in our life. What would Jesus do in this situation? We need to have a Christian worldview. Do you have a Christian worldview? When you see things in the world, when you do things, do you see it through the lens of the Bible, or do you see it through the lens of the world and the culture of our day? It's very hard to have a Christian worldview, because there again, the culture is all around us. But we see things, we do not want to see them through the lens of the world or the culture of our day, but we want to see things through the lens of the Bible, through Scripture. Psalms 26 verse 5. Psalms 26 verse 5. I have hated the assembling of evildoers and will not sit with the wicked. We also need to be careful of the people we surround ourselves with. Now, somebody will always say, well, Jesus ate with sinners, and if we're not with these evil people, how are we going to bring them to Christ? Well, first off, when Jesus was with these evil people, with prostitutes and thieves and all that stuff, tax collectors, he wasn't there to have a party with them. He wasn't there, to be part of what they were doing. He was there to pull them out of that and pull them to Christ. And if they followed him, wonderful, but he just didn't hang around with them to be hanging around with them to do the things that they were doing, but he was pulling them out. And we as Christians are to do that with the worst of people. But if people are not going to follow Christ, if you're not pulling people away from their evilness, they're probably pulling you towards it. Do you understand that? If you're not pulling people away from their evilness, then they're probably pulling you towards that evilness. It affects our actions. We're going to hang around with evil people, even though we might be striving to be a Christian. It's going to make it an awful lot harder, and I'd say impossible to be as strong a Christian as you could be. And I've seen this happen so many times. So many times. I have seen people marry non-Christians and be pulled away. Now listen, I know there's people who are married non-Christians and they end up pulling them to Christ. That happens. But it's rare. Most of the time they don't pull that person towards Christ, and they live in a very difficult marriage, difficulties with the children, difficulties with how often they're going to be able to come to worship and things of that nature. And I've also seen it many times where they pull somebody away from Christ. In fact, I was just told this week by somebody who was talking about their sister is with somebody from the Baptist church, and how she's giving up the Church of Christ and going to the Baptist church. It also affects how people look at us, both inside and outside the church. You get a reputation for the people that you hang around. And if you hang around evil people, they're going to see you as being part of that group. And we as Christians, we need to be careful about how we're seen. We need to be careful about how we're seen. And don't lie to me. If you're hanging around with these evil people all the time, don't be telling me that, oh, I'm doing that to bring them to Christ. No, because they're going to get tired of that. They're not going to want you around anymore. I had an elder at a church that I was at once, and he would go every year on a extended hunting trip with a man in the community who was not a Christian. And he was known as a scoundrel. He was known as somebody that would take other people's money through business deals, and he was known as a really bad person. And there were people who would not come to the church that I was working at because of that situation. Because of that situation. Now there again, I'm not saying that it's always wrong to be around these sinful people, because yeah, we do got to try to bring them to the Lord, but that needs to be our target. That needs to be our goal, and we have to be careful, because what does the Bible say? Don't be unevenly yoked. Because when you're unevenly yoked, I'd say 8 to 9 times out of 10, the evil person is going to pull the Christian person away. And folks, it's just a matter of fact. I have seen it over and over. I was a youth minister in my younger days, and I've always continued to work with the young people. And it's not just true for the young people, but for the older people. There is no greater influence to draw somebody away from Christ than another person. Who is not a Christian. There's no greater influence. So we got to have that balance there. Yes, we need to be in the world trying to bring people to Christ, but we also have to be careful of the influence. We have to be careful of, am I pulling them towards Christ, or are they pulling me the wrong way? And there again, how does it look? You know, I've even known of people to say, well, I'm going to go to the bar and minister to people. Well, there's so many things wrong with that. You know, and I don't want to get into all of them, but just one of them is your influence, which is what we're talking about here. They see you going into the bar, they don't know that you're going in there to minister to people. In fact, most people would laugh at that and realize how stupid that was. I've had people ask me questions about, well, can I buy, some alcohol and cook with it? And being a Christian, I wouldn't advise that. You may hide it under your groceries, but somebody's still going to see it. You may hide it under your groceries, and you may go out to the self-checkout, but that person who is watching the self-checkout still going to see that alcohol come up and look at you and think, they're supposed to be. So we need to be careful about who we hang out with and the reason why we might or might not be hanging out with that person. 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 10. 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 10. In like manner also the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but what is proper for women professing godliness with good works. Listen, I've always lived in hot parts of the country. I lived in Northern California, where it got extremely hot, and now I live in Arizona, where it gets mighty hot also. I'm in the cooler part of Arizona, but today I think it was about 104 still. And it gets hotter. Understand, we don't want to wear heavy clothes, and in fact, when I'm not having to work as a minister, I'm usually in some kind of gym type outfit, a tank top of some shorts and some sort, and some longer shorts and sweats. But we need to be careful how we dress as Christians. How we dress says a lot about ourselves. And it's like going into Walmart this time of year. What do you see at Walmart? You see all those short shorts and crop tops and all those things. And we need to watch. Girls, you need to watch. Men are very visual. When I will post something on Facebook about women watching how they dress, I always get a whole bunch of women say, well, men need to watch it too. And that's true. But I'm going to tell you something. God created us differently. No matter what your college professor might have told you, there are differences between men and women. In fact, there was a man once that wanted to do an experiment on this. He wanted to do an experiment on this. Are men and women differently because of culture, because of how we raise them, or is there things hot-wired into them that is different? So one year for Christmas, he had a little girl. Instead of buying her little girl stuffed dolls and things like that, he bought her a set of trucks. He wanted to see how she would react to a set of trucks. So he bought her a set of trucks, and she opened the set of trucks and was playing with them, and he went and asked her, do you like your trucks? The little girl said, oh yes, Daddy. And he kind of thought then, see, it is a cultural thing. We buy boys' trucks, we buy girls' dolls, and that's why but then the little girl said, Daddy, this is the papa truck, and this is the mama truck, and this is the baby trucks. See, it's what we're wired different. And guys are so wired visually. Girls, you have no idea. You have no idea. There are men who do not want to even wait on the Lord's Supper anymore, because they'll go by the begin the Lord's Supper out, and they'll go by the aisle and they'll look down, and where they see all these legs, everywhere, and they don't want that. They don't want that. I went to a Church of Christ once that had a vocal team. And this vocal team got up, and you had these ladies in their nice dresses, and they were up there, supposedly leading the ladies while the men led the men. And I don't want to get into this right now, but that's wrong. But anyway, I was there at this time, and I was a young man at that time. These girls in these dresses were swaying as they were singing, and their pretty dresses, and their nice makeup and nice hair. And believe me, I wasn't thinking about the song. I was watching these young ladies perform for me. Some will say, well, it's not the woman's fault if the man lusts. Now listen, men are going to have an issue with that and lust even if a woman's dressed in a gunny sack. But you can certainly help him to not lust by the way you dress. And I don't think God is saying by this passage by any means that you have to dress like an oversized moo-moo or whatever. But I believe that he's teaching us, number one, don't show off by the way you dress. And number two, dress in a way that is not going to cause any kind of excessive lust. Don't be too low with your dress, don't be too high with your dress, and don't be too tight with your clothes. And yes, there are some clothes that some women could wear and look okay in because of the way that she's built. Another girl would not be able to do that. That's just the way it is. And as Christians, we need to set the example with our clothes. And Christian boys, men and boys, we need to watch what we wear also. And I think that some things that I've seen Christian boys, young men, is some of the shirts they were wearing, what's on them. Don't come to church. Well, don't get one, period. Don't get a Corona shirt. Don't get a shirt that's praising the devil and some rock thing or whatever. Careful how we dress. We say a lot about ourselves by the way that we dress. Ephesians 2 verse 10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." We're going to have different concerns and interests than the world. What do worldly people generally have in mind? Generally, it's how much fun can I get out of this life? How high can I get out of this life? What can I get for myself out of this life? Those are some of the main things that drive people in this world. Those are some of the main things. What kind of entertainment? How high can I get on drugs and alcohol? What can I get for myself? If a Christian, we're to be concerned with others. We're to be people that help others, who do things for others. God tells us that right here. We're his workmanship. We're created by God and then recreated in Jesus Christ for good works. And God prepared these things. He prepared things. He put us here, wherever we're at, for a reason. Just like with Esther, the great book of Esther. Esther was scared. Esther didn't want to go before that king. She hadn't been called before him. And if he didn't accept her coming before him, she would be put to death. But her cousin Mordecai told her that, if you don't do this, God will save his people. He can do it using somebody else or some other means, but you will lose the glory. You will lose the blessing that was intended for you because you were created for this. How many blessings might we be losing? I wonder how many I've lost over the years because I haven't done the work that God had prepared for me beforehand to do it. We need to be looking for that work. We need to be doing that work. And don't just sit there and say, well, I'm going to wait till it lands on my lap. No, read the Bible. You know what you're supposed to do. If we're to be like Jesus, what are we supposed to do? We're to go out into the world, help people who are deserving of it with their worldly needs that they have, food and clothing and things of that nature, and to tell the world about Christ. Tell the world about Christ. Galatians 5, verse 22 through 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. We're going to have to show there again a different attitude and different actions in our lives as Christians. Our life should be one that shows love for God, love for his creation, love for others, joy. Oh, there's so little joy in this world. It's all about, when I was going down to the gym, they'd have some of these reality shows on, and there wasn't much joy in those shows, Never really watched all of them, but if I'd be sitting there doing some sets and it was on the screen, you'd see, the Kardashians or whoever just yelling and screaming and upset. They didn't have joy, peace. They didn't have peace either. Long suffering means we suffer long with people. We deal with people who have problems and issues, and life's not like a sitcom where you got a problem in 30 minutes, it's over. Sometimes people have problems for a long time, and we are to bear with them and struggle with them, keep working with them. There's been people, there's one guy who's a faithful Christian now. Now, for years down at the gym, he would just ask me little things about Bible and being a Christian. And one day he Facebooked me and said he was coming to church, and he's been coming ever since. He's baptized a few years ago now. Sometimes we got to suffer long. Kindness, we're to be kind to people. This world is so cruel, and you can read about the cruel things that have happened over and over, and it just breaks my heart sometimes. But we're to be kind. Goodness, we're to be good people. We're to be the good guys. You know, like the old cowboy movies, you had the bad guys usually dressed in black, and you had the good guys dressed in white, and the bad guys did bad things and the good guys did good things. And of course, in the movies, in the end, goodness always won. And in real life, in the end, goodness always wins. We're to be goodness. Faithfulness, we're to be faithful people. We're to be faithful to God. We're to be faithful to His church. We're to be faithful to our friends. Be faithful to our brothers and sisters. Gentleness, we're to be gentle people. There again, the world's very harsh. And it's so easy to destroy people, and it's just so harsh, and sometimes it's hard even for me. You know, when I'm dealing with benevolence, you deal with a lot of people that sometimes you just want to say, stop being a bum and get to work like everybody else, pull yourself up. But sometimes you have no idea what's gone on in their past, what they're dealing with. If they have mental illness, we're to be gentle people. Self-control, boy, that's hard. There again, talked about earlier in the sermon here about having bad days and you know, letting ourselves get out of control, or not controlling our thinking, not controlling our actions with others. That's something there again that we need to work at. We need to work at as being a Christian, as being an example to others. And finally, Luke 6 verse 40. Luke 6 verse 40. A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained will be like his teacher. So who's our teacher? It's Jesus Christ. And it talks about being trained here. That means it's going to take time. It's going to take time. It takes time to be trained. Listen, I've done a lot of sports before. It took me time to be trained in those sports. When I become a Christian, I needed to be trained to be a Christian. When I started working as a minister, I had a man who had been a minister for a lot of years, more than I had been, and he kind of took me under his wing and he trained me to be a minister. We need to be trained. We need to be trained. And training takes time, energy, and effort. At times we can be like a child. You know how a child is, that we tell them what to do and to behave, but they sometimes they just have to, you know, we tell them to sit there and they're just wiggling their bodies, and pretty soon they're seeing how far they can go and they get on the ground. And we could be like that, can't we? But we need to grow up. That child grows up and he learns that he needs to sit there, and there's reasons for that. So we need to strive. We need to strive to be trained to be better. We need to remember there again that saying, what would Jesus do? Before we act or react or don't act, we need to ask, what would Jesus do? And in closing, we need to remember they are watching you, and it does matter. It does matter. I remember there was a movie that I watched, and this man said that one of the things that he said was, our actions echo an eternity. Our actions echo an eternity, and we need to remember that. We need to remember that both the right and the good and the godly and the righteous actions that we do echoes in eternity, but so do the actions that we're not supposed to do, the ugly, the ungodly, the wrong, and the sinful. We need to strive to be more like Christ each and every day. We need to train for it, pray for it, and we need to remember that our goal to get to heaven and to bring others there depends upon it. If you are listening to this today as your sermon for your Sunday worship time, don't forget your other acts of worship. Sing hymns and songs to the Lord. Take the Lord's Supper to pray. Give an offering to the Lord. If you're not a member of the Church of Christ, I hope, listen, with all sincerity, I hope that you'll call or go and visit a Church of Christ in your area and get to know those people. If you've not been baptized for the remission of your sins, please remember that's something that you must do. That's something that you must do in order to be saved. There again, call or go by and visit a Church of Christ in your area, and they will help you with that. I want to thank you for watching this again. I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful week. And if you found this video useful, please share it with others. God bless you.